we are as a people. And to some extent, you know, there's we have a structure which is laid out for us in the Constitution. I think every time you read the preamble, uh, just highlighting the pillars that our country stands on. They're very worthwhile pillars. I mean, the Constitutional Assembly debated for a long time many issues. Reading through those is quite an experience. But you can see that they foretold almost every problem or concern that we'd face over time, and they gave us a constitution which we have to work uh, within. And we have to protect and preserve that constitution also, the basic framework. And my sense is if we do that, if we grow within that structure, we will have strong, sustainable, inclusive growth, which is all you can wish for.
And like you said, there are a lot of young people in the country, and you know, students getting into the bracket of the working population very soon. And in the book, you do say that there is a sense of restlessness among the youth. So, why do you think that is coming about, and what all can we do to counter that?
Well, I think restlessness is not a bad thing necessarily, because it reflects a sense of discomfort with the current situation. And any youth, I mean, youth are the source of change. You have to be uncomfortable with the current situation and hope to make it better. So I think that discomforted restlessness is not a bad thing. The question is, are there channels through which your energy can be directed, in which we get change without uh, dramatic, violent disruption? And that's clearly, our biggest question. How can we challenge this energy? How can we channel it into something very worthwhile? And of course, one um, sort of need of the hour is to remove the kind of insecurity that a lot of youth face. What am I going to do in the future? Am I going to have a job? Is it going to be a good job? Is it going to be a decent job? Am I prepared for that kind of world? And of course, this is happening in India even before we talk about all the changes that are happening in the rest of the world. The increasing automation of factories, the increasing use of AI across various services. What will happen when all that comes in? Will our youth have prospects? And of course, the kind of frustration that emerges when you have somebody who's basically sees the government as their only avenue and spends 6, 7, 8 years taking government exams, IAS, RBI Class B, defense services exams, and finds they're not successful. And then by age 32, 33, they essentially superannuate from taking exams. They have to retire. And there's nothing left at that point because they've just become practiced at taking exams. And unfortunately, the kind of practice that requires doesn't necessarily qualify you for a lot else. Uh, and one of the things we write in the book is maybe we should have certain elements in these exams which allow you another career. Maybe, some vocational streams should be part of the subjects which are very much in these exams. So that worst comes to the worst. I mean, is it better, to have studied economics or interior design if you're going to be a local administrator? It's not clear. It seems to me that you can get a lot from interior design also, maybe a little more relevant to the job of local administrator if you're trying to design buildings and where they're laid out and so on. But the broader point is that we need to channel that restlessness. What we argue in the book is it is too much to expect that governments will create all the jobs. That in some sense we have to. One of the channels that this youthful energy has to be put to is entrepreneurship of various kinds, whether it's starting firms, whether it's starting social organizations, whether it's starting movements. How do we do that? And that r- suggests that some of our old strengths of openness, allowing a variety of organizations to flourish, is going to be very important there. So we need to pick what's good in the past, but also change what isn't. And trying to do that in an effective way is going to be a challenge over the next few years. But definitely, we need to challenge the restlessness into constructive change.
Well, human capital is something you talk a lot about in the book, that we need skilled human capital, whether it is manufacturing or services. And like you mentioned, just to bank on government jobs only is not going to pave the way. So, how do you build, through our existing and future educational institutions, build a whole variety of skills and opportunities, for this huge base of young population?
So, one of the interesting sort of experiences we had while talking to entrepreneurs was they said, we can't find people, we can't find workers. And our initial reaction was shock. How can't you find workers? We have 1.4 billion people. You must be able to find workers somewhere. And their point is, we can't find people who are trained or qualified to do the jobs that we have. So there's a skill gap. There is a capability gap. That's, I mean, solvable, but it does require action. This survey which we point to, skill survey, WeBox, essentially says 50% of Indian graduates are unemployable. They don't have a skill that companies are looking for. Of course, there are people who get jobs in an instant, and now they're getting not just national jobs but international jobs. But they are still a minority, and in the vast majority, we need to figure out how to match their skills to what industry or business more generally needs. So that's one challenge: how to upgrade the skill levels. Some of it comes from breaking age-old sort of stigmas associated, say, with working with the hand. In fact, if you look at most work, uh, it's much less working with the hand as a mix of working with the hand and working with the mind. Even factory work is trending towards that. The very, very low skilled stuff simply is getting automated for the most part. So we need to sort of destigmatize the willingness to work in factories and so on. In a bunch of European countries, there are guys with undergrad educations who take up jobs on the factory floor, and of course, many engineers work on the factory floor because that's where all the problems and the innovation happens. But I think we need to destigmatize, but we also need to align sort of the capabilities they get with the jobs that are available, which means much more industry business partnerships with training institutions, but also very specific training. I work with the government of Tamil Nadu, and they have a scheme now, upskilling scheme called Non Mudalman, which is a way of training people in specific capacities. I mean, uh, jobs as carpenters. How do you get a good carpenter? That's a skilling process, but it's also on the job experience process. How do we get both? So you learn the sort of apprenticeship of carpentry, and then you go and actually do it and get better at it over time. How do we do both? And there are so many jobs that can be created in that way. So we need to be clever. Of course, there are new jobs that can be created. We need to be much more focused on how to create those new jobs. Some of them will be in government. One of the places where India has too few jobs relative to other countries is in local government. Why? Because we centralize so much. And as a result, we at the same time feel we are over governed, while in fact, when you look at the numbers, we have you know much lower levels of government. Government capacity is much lower because we don't have much local government. So one of the big points we make in the book is we need to decentralize government. I mean, uh, again and again we point to the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is the by population the fifth largest country in the world. If everything is done from the capital, then the local panchayats, the local municipalities have very little agency. A lot of the decisions are taken up there, a lot of the policies are created there. They're not sensitive to the needs and the concerns of the local people, but they're also not responsible to the local people. And that makes for a country which goes off track because the policies at the ground level don't match. One of the interesting sort of examples we give in the book is China, where you think China is such a centralized country, Communist Party ruling everything, etc. But somehow within that centralization, they've managed to decentralize to the local governments. And the local governments, the mayors of the cities, have a lot of power to change things on the ground for their local firms. And as a result, each municipality is in competition with the other municipality because each one wants growth. And so each one is like a mini country trying to do the best for the companies, for the workers inside. And that's very healthy competition. Used to be, now it's much less so because they're trying to re-centralize against again under Xi Jinping. We should learn from some of these that maybe uh, what India needs. Think, for example, of the states which provide the best healthcare and education. You immediately come up with examples like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Delhi now increasingly. That's because these states have a much more decentralized process. Delhi is, in fact, not much bigger than a municipality, actually, not much bigger than an Indian district. And as a result, it's effectively a decentralized state. And you can see much more focus of the recent AAP government on things like schooling, on things like healthcare. And I think we need to learn lessons from that, but that also means a lot of jobs can be created in that area.
You spoke about policy, Dr. Rajan, and I want to talk a little bit about education because I think we all have seen this in our families, among the youth. There is a huge migration for higher education, and you see, I'm from Patna. I came to Delhi to study, and similarly, people get drawn to the metros and some of the best institutions. While if we, even decentralize education and have good institute in various cities across the country, then there are more opportunities because there are limited seats. There's a very tough competition and very limited seats. So you mentioned this in the book too, the National Education Policy 2020. It has not been fully implemented, while in other areas we see implementation as a strength for the current government. So, what is more that is required to be done in the education sector, and how can we ensure that there are equal fair opportunities for this huge young population?
Well, first, let me point to Rohit, who's sitting somewhere, hiding somewhere there. He's hiding there. Rohit, loves, as do I, many elements of the national education policy because it's a thoughtful document. It talks about some of the frailties of our system as well as how to change. You know, if you look back at Indian education, we actually failed our people ever since independence. Uh, for a long time, in fact, till right about the economic liberalization, we really didn't think education was needed for the masses. And you can go into Myron Wiener from MIT has a whole theory of why our caste system led us to this outcome that it was felt that the quote unquote lower caste didn't need education; they would be educated beyond their sort of they should not have the ambition that education brings because they're perfectly suited for the jobs that were available. On the flip side of it is that we really didn't have a need for education if many of the jobs were in agriculture. At least that was the feeling. Of course, agriculture increasingly needs a lot of education also to run a farm scientifically. But that wasn't the feeling at that point. I think that over time, what has happened is we've seen that the demands of industry are for more and more educated workers. Again, the point I made earlier: manufacturers not finding workers because they don't find skilled people. But I think beyond that, Actually, education has to run ahead of industry at this point, because there's so many areas where education, universities can do the research, can do the development, which can then feed into industry and create products. One of the biggest missing points, again and again, we heard entrepreneurs in India talk about, is India doesn't have fantastic products. Where is the Indian TikTok? Where is the Indian Tesla? Where is the Indian Nvidia? Now, we don't have any of these big companies, partly because we haven't done the research and development, the innovation, the design, which goes into the products which create these companies. So, why don't we do that? Well, we talk to people around, talk to one of India's most famous entrepreneurs, Yusuf Hamid, who started Cipla. And Hamid said, why am I in generics? Because fundamental research is very, very costly. And you guys think the American companies do it? They don't. They take from the universities. And as a result, they commercialize yes, they do some research, but it's on the backs of what was originally in the universities. So the need of the hour is for education to outrun business, to provide the ideas. And we have the capabilities. Now, let me tell you what the constraint in higher education. So earlier we had IITs, IIMs, and our industry couldn't use them because we weren't cutting edge. Now our industry has the capability of using them, but we don't have enough IITs, IIMs, and we don't have really top-notch research institutions like MIT or Tsinghua, like our top research institution is the Indian Institute of Science, great institution, but still not within the top 100 in the world. We need many more in the top 100, not only to do the research but to teach the teachers. Now the question is, how do we get this? And this is where I want to get to the point. You said from the uh, two second tier and third tier cities, they're migrating to the metros. Well, from the metros, they're migrating abroad to study. We have 7.5 lakh students every year who are going abroad. Let's say each of these students is spending $25,000. That's a low. Depends if you get the cheap education outside, that's your cost per year. I mean, just multiply those numbers, and you're talking tens of billions of dollars. That's how much we're spending on. I mean, effectively, this is importing education because we don't provide it within our country. The biggest potential import substitution industry we have in this country is higher education. If we can create strong institutions, we will keep a lot of the youth from going abroad. That's not necessarily the ultimate aim, but the aim is to give them a choice. Do you want to study in this country in a top institution, or are you forced to emigrate because you can't find good universities here? And if they can find those good universities here, not only is there a greater chance that they will stick, they might go abroad for a PhD and come back because they're much more attuned. If you send them early, they tend to go and not come back. The other thing is we have a ton of faculty outside. Rohit and I are both teaching at foreign universities. We have a huge number of people like this who have been supporting the kind of product innovation that's happened elsewhere in the world. Sergey Brin and Larry Page, who started Google, their professor was from IIT Kanpur, professor called Motwani, who helped them in their algorithm. I'm not saying he did it, but he was guiding their thinking. Couldn't we bring a bunch of these back to populate our top quality universities and thereby create that machine, that chain, which enhances human capital in this country? We have to think big. We have to, and this is not dismissing the quality of faculty in this country. There's great faculty in this country, but matching them with faculty from elsewhere, seeding the process of research and development in a much bigger way, which is already happening in a bunch of IITs. We talk in the book about research parks in IIT Madras and so on. But we need to do far more. The point in the book is we have examples of wonderful things happening in this country, but we need 100 times those examples, 1,000 times those examples. How do we get that in a more systemic way rather than, um, sort of by accident? And that's really what we need to be thinking about as we grow this country. How do we give everybody a chance at making it big?
And this is really interesting because not only do we need to create and encourage cutting edge research in various institutes across the country, but we also need to, bring back, some of our talent that left the country, and also help create this whole chain reaction, to help now and grow the education system, make it stronger, and to be able to provide more jobs. um, but what about the ownership of the IP? I think that is also an important aspect that we need to keep in mind. And how do you go about it?
Well, I think that's where you need to create more IP. That's how you own it. Now, we do create IP which we don't own. There's a lot of research and development taking place in what are called global capability centers. We are That's one of the fastest growing jobs in India, being employed by a GCC. Goldman Sachs, for example, has 8,500 people in India, the second biggest office outside New York, and those people are creating valuable intellectual products, risk management systems, trading systems, things like that. But there are others doing actual research, scientific research for a number of companies. Qualcomm now wants to cite some of its chip design. By some metrics, we're doing 20% of chip design in the world. Not the highest end, but certainly not to be sneezed at or sneered at end. What we need to do is certainly do more of this, but we need to also have Indian companies which own it, which create that creative process, and that means also more links with Indian universities who are creating the fundamental sort of intellectual property. So this is a whole of country approach. One of the important things we have to keep in mind is that a lot of research is global today. I was talking to a doctor in Chennai who essentially says every week he has a conference with a bunch of doctors across the world, many of them in Western countries, where they're comparing cases. Here's this case, and here's what I did. Here's that case. Here's what I did. Because we're all on the same frontier now, and it's everybody's learning from everyone else. I think we are in the extraordinary position as a country of having good relations with the West. And the West, more than the East, is still the place where intellectual property, strong universities, a lot of students from across the world flock. And I think we need to use that to our advantage. So I was saying bring back, but I also am saying send students to do their PhDs, to collaborate, send faculty to collaborate with universities across the world. Don't think anything not invented in India is not worth it. Uh, Try and absorb from the rest of the world. And the more open you are in terms of ideas, in terms of inclusiveness, in terms of treating everybody equally, the more you're going to be welcomed into those kinds of partnerships. And it is so important for India to be engaged in those partnerships because that is how we'll leapfrog. We'll reach the frontier rather than spend a long time. And this is not, we don't need to steal anything. We just need to be partners in everything. And today, there's a lot of the Indian diaspora which is already sort of engaged in that. Get them to help you make those connections. Get them to come back. Get the Sundar Pichais and the Satya Nadellas to help in India's growth. And I think that is going to be a game changer. What we don't understand is we have many strengths we can use. And again, we say in this book, a blind imitation of China is not in our interest. We need to chalk out an Indian path. It can be different. There are lots of good things China has done we should learn from, but let's not blindly imitate where they went. We can do better.
Well, we talked a bit about jobs and jobs in the skill sector to be able to educate people to get, jobs in the right sectors. But what about, a fair share of population that might not be so skilled or is unskilled? How can we create more jobs for people across different sections and population in the country?
So I think um, um, the whole point in the book is, let's focus as far as possible on upskilling to try and get better jobs. Of course, we also need jobs for people who don't have the chance to upskill, and who are at this point, uh, going to be at the level uh, they are. And I think we need to be creative in thinking about those kinds of jobs. So for example, there are many jobs in services as you grow cities, which are not necessarily the highest skill. I mean, let me ask the audience a question: which do you think is the most important service job in cities? Domestic help. Actually, it's work around the house, which is one of the biggest jobs. Security guard, big source of job growth in a number of cities, unfortunately. But domestic help, people who work around the home, is an important source of jobs. But also, I think in every city there are a whole set of jobs that emerge. I mean, just the job of cleaning the streets. Uh, what's that? Landscaping, gardening, retail, very big source of jobs. So we hear often from economists there are no jobs in services. Actually, that's where all the job growth has been happening. Manufacturing as a share of the economy has remained stagnant in jobs. Where the job growth has been happening is services. That is not to say we should abandon manufacturing. Lots of good jobs in manufacturing, but services and manufacturing are meshing together today like never before. I mean, take for example an entrepreneur we profile in the book, Lenskart. You've seen Lenskart stores around sprinkled around cities. What they do is a combination of manufacturing and services. They take, your measurements either by sending somebody home or in the Lenskart store for your eyeglasses. Then they go actually to the factory. They have a factory in Gurgaon which churns these out. They manufacture it. There's logistics in sending to the factory, bringing back from the factory. They employ north of 10,000 people, and that's essentially a mix of manufacturing and services. So lots of potential jobs like that. But even unskilled or semi-skilled, think for example, one of the biggest concerns we have is our young children. My colleague Jim Heckman at the University of Chicago says by the age of 5, it's too late to help children get better. Now he's a little pessimistic, but he's basically saying that you've given them the basic nutrition, you've given them the basic values, you've given them the basic learning. After that, it's much harder to, if they haven't had that. So, early childhood nutrition, early childhood education is something we have to work on really hard to make sure we do it right. Now, around the country, we have these Anganwadis which are spread. These are basically typically a woman manning them who helps pregnant mothers have a good pregnancy, and after that, nutrition of the child for first 2 or 3 years. Now, these Anganwadis focus largely on nutrition. That is all that worker can manage. But supposing you've got an extra worker in, one of the mothers of the young kids, who has a high school pass, she can teach those children basic mathematics, basic alphabets in a playful way. Um, why can't that be something we add on, right? There's million plus Anganwadis, that's a million plus jobs. But it's something which gets the mother into work. But also, once she gets the love of teaching, she gets the experience of teaching, maybe she could go become a teacher in one of the schools. Uh, you don't need to get them into the workforce. This is a good way of getting them into the workforce. Similarly, as we go green, There's so much need for green energy. And one of the beautiful things about green energy is it can be decentralized. You can have mini solar plants. Supposing you had a village solar plant or a small township solar plant, that creates jobs. Uh, it could be supported by the government, doesn't need to be run by the government, but supported. And there you have distributed energy widely. And you can also save on distribution costs. You don't need to have long line losses along the wires. But the local municipality then takes responsibility, part of decentralization, for the energy that comes from that. It's green. So we should be thinking more cleverly about the jobs that can be created. Not all of I mean, the ideal is we have millions of entrepreneurs who create jobs for everyone else. So we have to create the possibility for entrepreneurship, open it up. Uh, Fortunately, our youth are hungry for that kind of change and are doing it. But we need to multiply it many, many fold. But I have no concern about jobs if we do our homework on both ends. Make it easier to create jobs, make it easier to get people who can do the jobs. And that means work on upskilling and work on finding the right jobs and creating the environment for others to create jobs. And I think if we do all this, we will get there on jobs, but it has to be a laser like focus on jobs. Last point, a lot of our growth is jobless growth. So growth doesn't necessarily need to translate into jobs. Many of these large new industries that are opened are capital intensive, not necessarily worker intensive. So when we say we'll bring in manufacturing, it doesn't necessarily need to equate to more jobs. In fact, the areas of manufacturing which are most job intensive, leather, textiles, that's where we've been losing heft and weight. And that's something to be concerned about. That the most job intensive parts of manufacturing, we've been losing out on. And the new stuff, I mean, we talk in the book, we complain a lot about, we're getting into chip manufacturing. Micron is building a plant in Gujarat. $2.7 billion is the investment, of which the central government and Gujarat state are providing 2 billion. 2 billion for how many jobs? We're going to get 5,000 jobs at the end. For what? For putting together chips, parts which are brought in from elsewhere, and maybe testing them. Is this going to make us a chip manufacturer? No. Is it a prestige project? Yes. We will say we're manufacturing chips and we'll feel very proud about it, but we won't actually be doing that manufacturing. We will have a chip plant which is heavily subsidized. Now, you may say, what is $2 billion? Well, $2 billion is over one third the entire higher education budget of the central government, right? Which is 46,000 crores in the last year. What does that mean? That entire budget is what funds your IITs, your NITs, your IIMs, all the higher educational institutions. And we're spending that one third of that money to fund a chip plant, which is going to make not logic chips, which is the sort of fancy stuff that goes into your computers, it's memory chips. So, why? This is the kind of misplaced priority that we should avoid. Let's not focus on building swanky factories that employ few people. Let the private sector do that. They have all the ability. Let's not hugely subsidize that. Instead, focus on job intensive areas and which can be manufacturing or services.
Rightly so. And you also talk a lot about, women in the workforce, or, lack of enough working age women in the workforce in India as compared to other developing or developed countries. You mentioned the G20 countries in the book. How can we, address that, and what impact will it have on our economy?
I mean, every group that is excluded from the workforce because of difficulties. I mean, choice is fine. If you want to stay outside the workforce, that's fine. But if you are excluded because it's difficult getting to work, because you feel unsafe at work, because there are social norms which prevent you from working, I think we should work to to eliminate those. Uh, One of the statistics we don't point to, uh, which is unfortunate, is that we are the country with the lowest female labor force participation in the G20. Uh, that is a whole population. If they're not working out of choice, that's fine. If they're not working because they don't have the opportunity, we are losing a huge talent base. A talent base which is intellectually capable. Interestingly, more women are getting degrees in some areas than men. Uh, if they aren't participating in the workforce, we're losing talent. How do we bring them in? And that is a hugely important task. And it's actually working on things like job security. Do you feel safe in the workplace? Do you feel you might be harassed? Do you feel safe in getting to work? Are there buses you can take which protect you, where you feel safe and not the target of various bad elements? So it's not just that; it's also attitudes. One common attitude is when we grow rich, we bring the women back into the home because it's only when we are poor that they have to work outside. In fact, you can see this kind of U shaped curve in many countries. We are at the bottom of the U in terms of female labor force participation. The U is with income on this side and participation on the Y axis. And what you're seeing is as you grow richer, you go down first, then you go up. It's very important we go up once again. And we need to think about all the ways we can employ, including policies on childcare, on support that will make us go up again. And there are many ideas. I mean, one idea which seems a little regimented, but is a place we can learn from China. Is one way they protect their women is by building hostels for women next to the workplace. Of course, they have freedom to go to the town during the day, etc. But at night, they're well protected within the hostel. That's something to think about. That it prevents the danger of travel. It allows women from rural areas to go into the city and still their families feel they're relatively safe. And it does, if you can do it well, give them more freedom of choice. So we need to think about all these things far more.
I have time for one last question, Dr. Rajan. And after that, we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. Um, you say in the book that India should focus on the future, and there can be a unique India way of growth and development. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, it has two parts to it. One is the past is good to think about, but let's not get totally embroiled in the past. There are too many battles we fought in the past for us to fight them again. Let's leave the past where it is and move forward. Uh, I don't think the young generation should feel they're slaves of anything. I never felt I was a slave when I grew up. Maybe it was because I was from the South. I don't know. I never felt I was enslaved by any, colonial power or, historical power. And I think that it is important that we don't overemphasize these kinds of issues. They're in the past. Let's look at what we've achieved as a country, feel proud of it, and say that, you know, we can do better, we have to do better. And the way we do it is by figuring out what works for us. And when we say the Indian way, I mean, we can debate for a long time whether we got democracy too early. What we show in the book is a chart where, in development time, India got democracy way before the West got democracy. We were a poor country when we had democracy. The US, the UK democratized over time as they became richer. And in development time, they democratized later than we did. Of course, South Korea democratized even later, and China hasn't democratized yet. But what we're saying is what may have been early in development time, and we're not sure that everybody got it right, but you could argue that maybe we couldn't afford democracy, that a more authoritarian regime might have been good early on to build the roads and create the infrastructure, etc. Now, that itself is a debatable issue, because you could have gotten everybody wants Lee Kuan Yew as the dictator of choice. Instead, you could get Mobutu Sese Seko, and that would be a very different experience. So let's not yearn for autocracy. There are autocrats and autocrats, and some are terrible. But I think the point is that we are where we are now. And if we look forward, our democracy is our strength. Why? Because uh, for us to be able to say created in India, not make in India, created in India, if that's the future we're going into, of innovation, of creativity, of handicrafts, which are really superbly designed and superbly architected to give work to a whole lot of handicrafts people, but sold to the world with the branding of a Hermes or any of those Italian houses or French houses. I think what we need is to have that debate, to have the argumentation, to have that openness. People say, "Oh, China managed to, have a lot of patents without having the kind of openness that you're talking about." Yeah, that's true. But China, increasingly, the intellectuals are saying it's just hard to innovate here because our government is claustrophobic at this point. And I think going forward, I mean, look even at vaccines, right? Which countries developed the vaccines in really fast time? It was the Europeans and the Americans. It wasn't the Chinese. It wasn't the Russians. India had a decent vaccine, but we didn't sell it around the world. In fact, our best vaccine was from AstraZeneca, which was innovated in Oxford. The point I'm trying to make is that for the India of the future, democracy, debate, argumentation will help creativity. And that is why we need to preserve democracy. It'll also help create the kind of schooling, the kind of intellectual ferment within our universities that we desperately need for the India of the future. So, in that sense, democracy is not an elite project. It's not something that belongs in Leutchen's Delhi and the masses shouldn't care about it. The masses should care infinitely about it. We shouldn't narrow the space of democracy. We cannot afford to accept dictators. That is something which should well and truly not be in our future.
Well, on that note, the floor is open for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you. Please introduce yourself and give us a question, not a comment.
Very good morning, Dr. Rajan. My name is Dhruv Rampuri and I'm a student of law. Two questions, Dr. Rajan. Firstly,
One question. One question.
okay, Doctor. Um, you very rightly pointed out the problem that although we will be a younger economy in the future, the AI, artificial intelligence growth will also have an impact. Is there a viable solution which the country has? Because AI, as it is said, should be a complementing tool and not an overpowering tool. So, what could be a viable solution for such a large and a young economy?
Well, we certainly have to embrace AI. You can't ban it because that means the rest of the world will go ahead. Uh, but as you said, AI will have three effects. One is supporting work in a way to make it better, right? Already a bunch of journalists, when they want to write about something, will put the sort of initial words into ChatGPT, get a semblance of an article, then improve it. So AI can be a support, just like Excel was, or Word, or any of those. The second is AI will certainly displace. So, there will be some jobs which eventually, not now, it takes a while for any kind of technology tool to get to the point where you're willing to use it as human beings. Remember, they were saying, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, that driverless cars would be on the road in 2 years and all the truck drivers would be out of work. Well, it's still in a few years away. And so it takes time for technology to get to the point because it's that last 2%, today where AI hallucinates, where you're not going to trust AI and replace it. But there are many ways that over time it will displace jobs that no longer are viable because AI can do much of it, right? So today it's supporting consumer support. It's quite possible to imagine that some of consumer support will be displaced by AI over time as you get more confident. But then there's a third prospect, which is new jobs. Because we can do so much better, it creates new jobs. So, for example, yeah, I gave this example yesterday. Take a teacher in a classroom with 50 kids. Now, she can't teach all 50. And what she teaches at is the average level of the class. Half the class is bored, half the class doesn't understand what's going on. There's one person who understands, who's in the middle, who's happy both ways. Um, that's the problem in many classes. How do you keep kids, chugging along at the same? This is where, AI could help. Have a personal tutor for each student in the class. We're not very far from there. And it is something that can be done centrally. And then the software decentralized or given to the schools. And so have each student sort of pick up what they learned from the common lesson. And by the end of the week, they're at the same place. uh, Tutors, personal tutors. But then there's a whole industry in programming those tutors. That is a new industry, doesn't exist today. It's a combination of teachers as well as the AI people, right? So that's one example. Today, there's a whole new job which didn't exist before, AI prompter. So this is a person who knows what prompt to ask ChatGPT to get the response that you need, right? Um, think about the internet, all the big data that's been generated, huge number of jobs created in data analysis. Big data is one of the biggest courses in many of our universities. That didn't exist before. Problem is, we see the jobs that are going to be lost. We don't see the jobs that are going to be gained. Unless AI goes down a destructive route, and that's always possible. AI weaponization in different ways is possible. But I think it's going to be just like every other technology, partly useful, partly displacing, and partly new jobs. 60% of the jobs we have today, weren't there in 1940. It takes time. Jobs will be lost, but new jobs will be created.
Okay. Next question. Let's take one from the back. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Rajan. So, there is one thing I keep on thinking that in India we are severely underpaid. So maybe that's the reason when people go out from our country, they don't want to come back. And maybe that's the reason because of what sometimes people hesitate to take up a job. So, uh, so what do you think? So, what can be the reason why we are underpaid, and what can we do to avoid this?
Well, you know, I do think if you compare Indian salaries, um, certainly salaries are lower in many areas. But at the same time, the cost of living is also, except for housing, and the coffee you get at the various Starbucks and Costa coffees, which are outrageous, I tell you. If you just translate them even into dollars, it seems like an excessive price. Uh, but if you look at a lot else, haircuts. I mean, my last haircut cost me 150 rupees. I would pay in the US, I would pay something like 3,000 rupees for a cheap haircut like that, right? So the cost of living is also different. Now that said, I think the world is getting more integrated in terms of jobs at a particular level. So today, one of the biggest sources of job arbitrage, of labor arbitrage, is in areas like consulting. People are employing Indian consultants because even if they pay them top rupee, it's 30 to $40,000 for the brightest student that you can get from our top management institutions. while it costs $200,000 to get a top student from an international institution. So what is going to happen is those over time, as more companies come to India to look for those consultants, because work can be done at a distance, those salaries will narrow. And certainly there'll be some pressure on Western salaries downward, but there'll be upward pressure on Indian salaries. So I think over time there will be less need to go abroad to get that high salary. But remember, going abroad comes with higher costs abroad, and it's not necessarily a cakewalk.
Thank you, Dr. Rajan. It seems we're out of time. And unfortunately, I can't take any more questions. But
Can we take one question from a lady? Uh, there's a lady
sure.
back there.
Yeah,
Just
please.
just
The
to
lady
ensure that we have a little bit
in
of
red.
gender parity.
Yeah. Sorry,
Thank you so
Malvika.
much, sir. Good morning, sir. One thing I would like you stressed about the what shall we say, the education in absolutely grassroots level, kindergarten level, preschool level. But what do you think about the new education policy that the government has come up with, where you have lateral entries, lateral exit? Will that help in upskilling our
I don't know that aspect. What is the lateral entry, lateral exit?
I mean, nowadays they have diploma. Now we like in
Yeah.
3-year programs
Okay.
for 4-year engineering programs. You have exit levels
Yeah.
and lateral entry levels at
I think
diploma.
more flexibility is really good for the student. Too much regimentation. I got into a 5-year program where I said I would do electrical engineering. I have to graduate with electrical engineering. I don't have any option to opt out. That regiments, and sometimes you get the wrong. I mean, I don't like electrical engineering. I want to do something else. If if you give the students the option, maybe they'll go to something they like better, and that is a good thing. Sometimes it may be I really think I've got enough of education. I'm okay with a diploma. I'll do well in something else. So flexibility is good, and let's give more flexibility to the student. Sometimes we limit that flexibility to preserve the jobs of the teachers. We're not the people who should be preserved at this point.
Thank you very much. Let's give a huge round of applause to Dr. Rajan. Thank you for being here this